I don't need the world to know my intimate stories. What I want the world to do is understand the question of identity is really quite complex. For me, it was the labels. That was what was getting under my skin. The number of people who would open a conversation with, oh, so how many children do you have? You're not married? Ever been married? Oh, so you never married. And really, when you say no, where does the conversation go? Oh, what's wrong with you?
Welcome to Your Second Act, the podcast that proves that life doesn't have to end at 40, 50, or even 60, because when it comes to living your best life, age is just a number. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Your Second Act. Thanks so much for tuning in. What if your identity was shaped long before you were born? In midlife, many of us grapple with the question of who we really are and what our true identity is beyond the influence of our past experiences. Today's guest, Michelle Scheibner, explores this profound journey in her new book, Hush. After a life-changing personal loss, Michelle uncovered long-buried family secrets, stories of Holocaust survival and hidden disabilities that have quietly shaped her identity. In our conversation, we'll discuss how these inherited legacies impact our choices and behaviours, especially as we seek to redefine ourselves in our second acts. Michelle will share valuable insights on how confronting these patterns can help us break free from the past and embrace a new identity. If you've ever questioned why you feel the way you do, or why certain life patterns keep repeating, you won't want to miss this. Stay tuned as we uncover how understanding your history could be the key to transforming your future. But just before we get into Michelle's story, I'd love for you to take a moment to rate and review the podcast. Your feedback not only helps me improve, but it also helps other women discover these incredible stories. Plus, it's a great way to support the show, and I ensure that I can bring you content that inspires and empowers. So let's get into today's episode. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast. First off, I want to congratulate you on your amazing book, Hush. It was a really, really lovely read. And it's such a powerful and deeply personal exploration of identity, family, and the hidden stories that really shape us. And in your book, you uncover family secrets that had a profound impact on your sense of self. So, what I really want to know is what was it like when you discovered all these secrets? So, let's go back to what led you to actually want to find this out.
Well, first of all, thank you, Michelle, for having me. It's lovely to finally be here and talking to you and talking to your audience. And thank you for reading Hush.
Yeah, loved it.
Thank you. Because it is really about the unhushing. So what led me to it? I think the first thing, and I think your listeners would probably appreciate this. I'd been I'd tried everything to try and feel like I was living a life that I deserved, the dreams that I'd fully expected, the way my life would pan out. Um, and yet I'd had I think a sadness for as long as I could remember. In fact, I think I was kind of born sad. And a loneliness that was really very deep inside. And so from even when I was at university, that was when I first started trying to resolve a lot of this and trying to understand why I felt like I did. I mean, then I just
Yeah.
thought I was depressed. I didn't really grasp anything else. And then over the years, I look everything from intellectual pursuits, neuro-linguistic programming, or through to things like Reiki, kinesiology. You name it, I've tried it. And yet I didn't think I wasn't living to my full potential. By this time, I still hadn't married. I missed the opportunity to have children. And then the thing that really tipped it over for me was when I lost the person who I was the closest that I'd experienced to a soulmate. And the grief of that, I couldn't pull myself out of. I couldn't get back to functioning. Even the 80 or 70% that had been previously, I just couldn't. And so eventually I was urged to see a therapist, and her background is in narrative therapy. So understanding the stories that we tell ourselves and
So important.
yeah. And she just urged me. It wasn't just the grief of losing Chris, that there seemed to be a much deeper and profound grief that had been there for so long. And I guess she had a sense that there was more to the story. So she urged me to, well, open the Pandora's box of old documents and letters and so on. And then she really walked alongside me while I was uncovering and joining the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle.
And you speak of her in the book and how she was such a support for you, wasn't she, going through this? Because I think uncovering something like The Secrets, it'd be quite confronting to do that on your own. And at the time you didn't have your parents to be able to ask the questions. So that's what I found was really hard. It was like, well, she knows she's uncovering all this stuff, but there's no one to ask any questions. Only there was someone in Tasmania. Is that right?
I'd never had grandparents. So, and my parents had both died long before this, and I didn't have any siblings. So I think that is why Sarah was so important, because I had to talk this stuff through with somebody who was both caring about my welfare, but it could remain objective. Like when you talk to your friends, of course they want to support you, and like they're not really objective. They're there to care for you, of course. They want the best for you, and they didn't know any more than I knew, anyway. But Sarah was able to help me unpack it within a framework and could remain objective to that. She sensed very early that I wasn't able to talk about my feelings. Like, I can talk about anything underwater that's in my brain, but I can't describe feelings. So every time she'd ask me a question, I'd tell her what I thought, not what I felt. She identified that as being, um, it's a symptom of really suppressed memory and feeling that didn't necessarily start with me. So yes, I did go down to Tasmania.
Yeah. When you were started to uncover the secrets, they were quite profound secrets because you had no idea. So then you started to question your own identity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, the interesting thing about this, Michelle, is that some of the information I did know, I put it away in another part of my memory somewhere. So the first secret, I guess, was that I'd always been told I was an only child. I was
Yeah.
raised an only child in the house, in the home. I knew that my parents had had a baby before me, but the story had all through my toddler years and until I was about to leave secondary school, the story had always been that he had died very soon after after birth, with a blood disorder. Um, and I just accepted that. But the secret part of that was that he hadn't in fact died, that he'd been born with Down syndrome and had been made a ward of the state and placed into an institution. And that was the end of that. So I left school and I went into adulthood. I went to the rest of my life thinking that that's what had happened. That because part of that story was, well, the doctors told us he was never going to probably live past the age of 7 at the most. What do you do with that? You just go, well,
Yeah, and that happened a lot, didn't it, in those days? Because what year would that have been?
that was 1951.
Incredible. They used to just lock them away, didn't they?
They did. They did. Um, what I didn't know was that my mother, along with this cousin from Tasmania, who also had a son in the same institution, used to go and visit him. What I really think about that is the impact of the grief and the shame that she must have lived with, and not to mention maintaining the secret. And yet it
Dreadful.
turns out that more people knew than I thought knew, that
Yeah.
I didn't know. She was very determined to keep that secret. Um, so when I was, 30 something, in my 30s, and I was engaged to be married and was assuming that I would be able to have a child, I was curious about this Down syndrome. I was curious that this other cousin of mum's also had a child in the same institution, and I assumed he must have been Down syndrome. Again, it wasn't talked about. So I thought, I better check. If I'm going to make babies, I better just check, is this inherited, or was it? And I was advised to go to a genetic clinic and they would be able to help me. Long story short, they could have helped me if I could have had a blood sample from my brother. And it was at that point I went back to my mother and said, do you think he's alive? Do you think you can help me find him? And she said, no, don't know, can't help. Sorry.
What do you think it was? Do you think she held shame around that?
A lot of shame. I think absolutely a lot of shame. I think uh, I'm quite convinced that the grief probably led to an early death for her, like an earlier death than she might have otherwise had. But since I've been doing this work in the last 4 years and really thinking it through, I think that she was protecting me. I think that there was a level of, they were older parents by the time they had me. They didn't want the burden of his care to be my burden. This is what I know. This is what I'm surmising. And then I really believe that she thought by this stage it was better to keep the secret buried, and it was better to leave me free to live my life unburdened. Of course, the emotional inheritance is greater than the burden of that.
Which is so interesting. And you never got to meet him when you found out that he was still alive. What I mean, I can imagine the thoughts that must have gone through your mind. And I wanted to ask you, did you have feelings of resentment towards your parents because they never told you? Like they denied you a relationship with your sibling.
I did. I had a lot of resentment, to the point where, so my mother was long gone by the time they were both long gone by the time I discovered Grant was alive. And the reason that I went down to Hobart to see Helen was, when I discovered that he was alive, I didn't know what to do with that. And I was quite conflicted, and because there was a bit of resentment why hadn't they told me. I could have made this decision sooner. This could have been so different. Like, I went through all of that. The members of my family that live on the other side of the country, their kind of response was, well, it's up to you. What do you think your mother would have wanted? Clearly, she didn't want me to. And then Helen was really quite strong in her. She said, your mother made this decision for you, for your best interests, and you kind of need to honour that. And what's really interesting is, in all the reading I've done and all the learning I've done and all the people I've spoken to, we do have a loyalty to our parents, even when they possibly don't deserve it. But there is something in the bond between a parent and a child that, even though I feel I was emotionally deprived, I've known that for a while, I still have a loyalty to their decisions.
I think there's that It's interesting because in the book, you talk about the relationships that you've had and how you never felt good enough and like you were
Yeah.
deprived what you really, really wanted in those relationships, but you obviously didn't feel you deserved it subconsciously. Now that you've gone through all of that, how has finding out these secrets, which there are more in the book, and I don't want to talk about all of them because I want people to go and read this book because it's quite fascinating. How has it changed you as a person today?
Look, it's so interesting. I feel like my energy has changed. I feel that anything that I've felt previously about, well, why wasn't I good enough for this? And why didn't I, all of those regrets and the question. What I understand now is that it didn't start with me.
Yeah.
This wasn't the result of anything I had done or, or of who I am. It was decisions made before I was born. It was experiences had by my ancestors, if you like, like
Mhm.
the last 2 or 3 generations of, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. It was their choices. And again, no blame. That's the environment they lived in. There was a very good reason for maintaining the silence. I understand that now. And I have been able to integrate that intellectual understanding of history and decisions that were made and taken and the consequences of that and integrate that into my own feeling. This life I'm living didn't start with me. I think the last line of my TED talk is, "Now I know I am enough."
Yeah.
Having spent well over 60 years thinking I wasn't enough, I now fully believe I am enough. And, it doesn't mean that I still don't go back into those something triggers me and I go back to, "Oh, you or this," and I don't. But I understand it now. I can regulate myself and my thinking and my feeling much with again, with more compassion and understanding so I can bring myself back. I don't carry the heaviness around with me. And I only know that because people tell me that. Yeah.
I think you talk about generational trauma, and that got me really thinking. I can see how that happens. I can see that each generation takes on something from the past generation, and especially if it's never been discussed openly. So that kind of becomes you in a sense. And now, as I'm older, I can see things about my parents that they possibly have never come to terms with or dealt with that I feel like I carry that trauma, that burden. And I'm always open about saying I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and things have been coming out, and it's like, well, that's really not about me, is it? It could be to do with my mother or her mother, and reading your book, it just brought it home, and I just thought, yeah, it's really interesting what shapes us in life, and it all comes down to also identity, which I find fascinating, and when you openly say, "Well, my partner died, my parents are no longer around, so I'm single, I'm not a daughter, I'm no longer a sibling." It's like, who are you? And I think a lot of women get to this point in midlife feeling those things. Like, how important is my identity? And is it shaped by my family, by all of that trauma? And yeah, I really wanted to talk about identity because I think it's a really important subject because we find comfort in identifying ourselves. I'm a mum, I'm a lawyer, I'm a this, I'm a that. But do we really need to have those labels?
Or you're speaking my language now. This is my
I
absolute
find it really interesting.
this is my passion. It's really, this to me is what it's all about. This is why I wrote the book,
Yeah.
really. I don't need the world to know my intimate stories. What I want the world to do is understand that I think um, the question of identity is really quite complex. And sure, if you Googled what is our identity, you'll get lots of different responses. For me, certainly it was the labels that really that was what was getting under my skin. The number of people who would open a conversation with, "Oh, so how many children do you have?" Well, first of all,
No.
do you have children?
Yeah.
How many?
Yes.
That kind of thing. And really, when you say no, where does the conversation go?
Nowhere. It's
Doesn't
very uncomfortable.
No,
Yes.
very uncomfortable. Or the number of people who would start um, an opinion with, as a mother, as a parent, and when you people don't notice this unless they're not, because then you notice it all the time.
Of course.
You start noticing how people use that as an opening gambit for their credibility. That this is my right to have an opinion.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
interesting.
Sure, I don't. This is how I felt. This is how it played out for me. Um, or so you're never married. You're not married. Ever been married? So then it becomes there's a hanging in the air of, oh, what's wrong with you that you haven't been
Yeah,
married?
yeah.
Now, this was the generation that I grew up in. I remember going to the first school reunion, which was 10 years after I'd left year 12, and everyone was there with either they're flashing their diamond engagement rings or wedding rings or photos of their babies or whatever. And I just didn't have any of those stories. I didn't have anywhere to fit. There, I was just a teacher, just a
Just,
teacher.
just. I love that
Like I
word.
had this loose thing,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
So there were just different. Then the whole thing about, oh, what are you doing for Mother's Day?
Mm,
Well, I'm not. Don't have a mother. Not a mother.
yeah,
So, once, twice a year, you're dealing with that. And so it's how those are identifying, those kind of labels are identifiers, whether we like it or not. And of course, all we've done now in recent times is create more labels. Instead of just getting rid of labels, we're actually creating more labels.
yeah,
But th- then I think it was when Chris passed away, because we hadn't been in an intimate relationship at that time. I wasn't his de facto, I wasn't his wife, I was a friend.
but
I
you
felt
were
like,
in a romantic relationship for a
yeah,
long time. Just towards the end, it had
yeah, yeah. I felt that people kind of, well, I don't know why you're so upset. It's not like you were married. It's not like you were still together. No, but he was my right arm. So,
yeah,
so again, the label prevented me from expressing my grief or from people appreciating my grief.
yeah,
I
that's
think.
interesting.
To me, these are all layers of self-identity. This is me imposing all of this on myself. I mean, people weren't intentionally doing this, but this is the filter that I saw my identity through.
Yeah,
I kind of felt like I was just, there was no legacy. I wasn't going to be leaving any legacy. I was just kind of living a life. And I understand the importance of family and understand the importance of community, but I couldn't find a community to be part of that I wasn't still not being judged, but where labels were still important, I guess. So I this is why I love working with people to help them find and activate their true self-identity. And I love the opportunity to see the themes because I find I use my intuition. I I've got a lot of learning. I understand that. I've been around a long time. I know all this stuff. But it's intuition that helps me see themes and patterns and intersections and underlying reasons. It's like getting underneath an iceberg, that 7/8 of the iceberg that's below the waterline and digging around in there and helping people really fully understand their own magic. Nobody has that same combination of elements below the waterline. Nobody. There's no two of us. I love that. I love helping elevate them and help them see themselves and self-identity.
It's, just listening to you, it's really sad. And I guess because I am married, I have parents, I have children, I've never stopped to think about those types of labels and that sense of belonging. I think it's something that I take for granted that I have, I belong to that type of group. But yeah, what happens when you don't? When you don't belong? It's that sense of, well, I feel alone. No one understands me. I do believe that setting all of that aside, those type of labels, I think as women, we can sometimes feel that regardless because you have no understanding of essentially who you are at this point in life. We've had so many years of experience, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, who the hell am I? I'm not needed like I used to feel like I was needed. And now it's like, exactly, where is my magic? Where is my individuality? And that is really, really scary to come to terms with. So it's great that people like yourself are helping others do that self-discovery.
You use the word belonging. For whatever reason, when there isn't a sense of belonging, the loneliness that comes with that, and I don't mean, I don't have connections, and so of course I do, but you can still feel lonely in those groups when there's an underlying sense of not belonging, an underlying, you can't quite picture it, you can't quite name it. If I used to say, well, in that, certainly that 6 to 12 months after Chris died, I'd say to myself, gee, I just wish they'd walk in my shoes just for one day to really understand what this is like. The one person where I did belong with
Yeah.
isn't there now. So many people, I was talking at a book festival in August, and I was talking about the book, and there was a woman, she was waiting for me outdoors. I was signing some book. It's very cool when you get to sign sign the book.
Yeah,
Very
of
cool.
course.
She said, "Oh, I can't wait to read this. Thank you so much for writing it, but thank you so much for talking about it." And I said, "Oh, why is it so important? What are you feeling?" And she said, "Well, I've never married, and I'm 62, and I don't have children, and um," she said, "I just don't really know where I belong, and I don't feel seen, and I don't feel heard." And I could see looking at her, like she looked older than me, and she was in fact younger, but I could see that absence of belonging, and she didn't like. I could see that she was kind of, "Oh, this is okay. It's okay now." And I would love to have known what she's thinking and doing now that she's read the book. Hopefully, she's read the book. So I know I'm not alone in thinking. I
Of course
know
not.
that, yeah, and as you say, it is. You don't have to have my story to feel this.
No.
To all my clients who've been married or are married
Yeah.
and have successful businesses, that there's when we don't go back and ask the questions and have an inquiring mind, we miss an opportunity to be fully present and to be fully living who we are.
Yeah. I think you've got to stop running away from it as well. I think sometimes people don't want to know and they just want to say, the past is the past, let it be. But I don't think without maybe trying to investigate and trying to work out essentially why you feel the way you feel or what's happened, how can you move forward? How can you try and be a better version of yourself without doing the work? But I guess it's easier said than done, isn't it? Because we all have a lot of trauma that we push down or we don't want to deal with, or generational trauma. And yeah, it is. It's quite fascinating. But it is so important that this time in our lives, we owe it to ourselves to, you know, shed all that rubbish, shed all that bullshit, basically, that has held us back for so long, to really like just
Yeah.
break free and just do the work and work it out. I am just
Yeah.
such a big believer in that. But yeah, how you speak about identity, it's so true. We all want to belong in these certain groups, so we're seen to be a certain way. But really, that's just very superficial. It's not essentially who you are, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. And when you go into these groups with that feeling, it's very hard to be fully present so that people can get to know you. And I
Yeah.
mean, how can people get to know you when you can fully you don't know yourself? You can't
Yeah.
be, just the sort of way you speak about yourself or the sort of way you engage in conversations with others. Um, we can't really truly connect with people if we can't be fully present in the conversation
Yeah. Yeah,
with
absolutely.
them. It needs on.
So now that you've uncovered these family secrets, and I think we touched on this before, but then we went off somewhere else. How are you now compared to the Michelle that first discovered the secrets? Like, how are you different? How do you feel about your life and yourself now since doing the work?
Well, I think I say somewhere in the book that I had become quite accomplished at not answering a question or answering a question with a question or being able to evade, so that um, because I've been all my working life, I've either been a teacher or a coach or a mentor. In some way, I've been in a role where I'm supporting other. It's not about me. It's
Yeah,
about
that's interesting.
who I'm. I
Mm.
And all the training I've ever done, I was training to be a counsellor as part of my diploma of education. I was going whole other story. And then as an executive coach, and then training narrative coaching. The thing that you learn is always it's not about you, it's about your client, it's about the person sitting in front of you. So that was so convenient for me because I meant I didn't have to reveal anything that would lead people to think, oh, gee, I'm not quite sure, but you're a full and complete person to be sitting here having a view. Um, Again, that's just different for thinking, but it was easy for me not to reveal anything much personal about myself. So if someone said, if a client met me, on a Monday morning and said, "How was your weekend?" I'd say, "Fabulous. How was yours?" Oh, and then what did you do and where did you go? And I, w- I'm very skilled at deflecting away from
Mm,
me.
of course.
Whereas now, no, I don't bore my clients with all my personal stuff. But now I'm more likely to share something myself to I allow myself to be vulnerable when it's an opportunity for the other person to connect with me at a deeper level.
Yeah. which is
for
important.
them to recognize, because we do know it is. And I think what I've really come to fully understand is we can learn about ourselves when we see ourselves reflected in the stories of others. It doesn't have to
Yes.
be the same story,
Yeah.
but when you share something of yourself, it makes it a little bit more real. It makes it a little bit more authentic.
Yeah, relatable.
So maybe, yeah, yeah. I maybe something I overshare now. I don't know. I still try to moderate my sharing, but I think um, I I can I can use the stories now as a way of highlighting and connecting and influencing someone to see another point of view and to
Yeah.
influencing is the wrong word,
Yeah.
but as an example, you know. So that's the one thing, and I think the second thing is I just have a much lighter energy when I walk in a room. I'm not walking in on the defensive.
No,
I'm
no.
walking in as a welcoming individual. I'm not hiding anything.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, well, wow, how freeing is that? That feeling of this is me, this is Michelle, warts and all. Um, how important is it now to belong, to have a label? Since you've done the work, like, what do you think about all of that now?
Now I think, well, now I know that I have some communities where I know I belong and I
Yeah.
know I'm valued and I know that I contribute and I know that it's my choice now if I don't belong for friendship isn't has always been um how sometimes we grow out of people or we go down different paths and friendships kind of crack a little bit. And I would always just try and okay, get it back on track because it couldn't be my fault. Whereas now I'm quite happy to say, look, do you know what? That's not serving me anymore. I don't need to do that just to have a friend. Don't want to be the person without friends. So I know when to call it. And I think this is that part of understanding attachment between mother and child more. Now that I wouldn't say I fully understand it because it's not um, it isn't my specialty, but I know a lot more about how the relationship between and when the relationship between mother and child begins, and really that is our first relationship, and it's the blueprint for all our relationships in life. It's the blueprint for how we show up. And when that's not solid, when we don't, if our mother is, well, maybe our mother's not present at all. Maybe we are raised by the caregiver, or our mother is present, but so distracted with, could be any range of things. With my mother, it was distracted with her own grief and shame, but she was also physically distracted in the home because she was looking after a disabled aunt who lived in the house with us, her own mother, and then my father, who had had a nervous breakdown and had escaped war and was clearly, I can see now in retrospect, showing definitely signs of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. So my mother was quite distracted. She didn't have a lot left in the tank for me from the time I was
No.
born until well, really until I left home at 18, 19, and went to university. I mean, she just didn't have a lot left in the tank. Um, and so my sense of self, and I think this is the part that really has made a difference to how I think. When I said earlier it didn't start with me, it started with not being raised with a fully present mother or father. Um, and so I didn't and without siblings, I didn't learn to negotiate. I didn't learn to deal with conflict. I didn't learn because there was so much silence. And so I became an adult that took this into relationships and friendships. I didn't know how to express my needs. I didn't know where the boundaries were. I didn't know that I could put boundaries in place because they had been placed on me. Again, this is this is how our identity and how we think about ourselves forms.
Yeah.
So I was kind of underdeveloped in the sense of, you know,
Yeah.
that's why I ended up in one of the reasons I ended up in so many bad relationships
Yeah.
because I just needed to be seen and liked.
That's
You know,
right.
when this is what we know now is when the mother is distracted and not fully present for whatever reason, the child seeks approval. You know, the putting out of the arms and the calling for mother. And when that's not reciprocated, then you kind of keep looking for that for the rest of your life. And you're prepared to take it even when it's not the right
Yeah.
occasion, purpose, situation. And this is how people get themselves into really negative, toxic situations, relationships.
It's frightening, isn't it? And you see it time and time again. And I think most of us have a little bit of that in us because no one's perfect, right? So, yeah, I mean, I can think back to past relationships as well, and you're trying to find this thing in somebody else, but it's about just finding yourself because once you're comfortable with who you are, you will attract the right type of person, the right friendships. I'm such a big believer in that. It's about an energy exchange as well, isn't it? It is so, so important, and I've realized the older I get, the more you need to continuously do the work, keep evolving, because you just don't wanna be stuck because you just keep making the same mistakes.
Oh, totally. Couldn't agree more. I think this is, this is the start of my learning in a lot of ways. I don't
Yeah.
think for 1 minute that I've done all the work now and I can just sit back and
No.
everything, you know, everything's going to come to me in all sorts of ways. Um, because it's you continue to evolve.
Yeah.
If you're not,
Which is
there's a
exciting.
problem. But
Yeah.
it is exciting. You know, we're never healed. We're never fully healed. Yes, I've resolved a lot of stuff, the secrets, all of that. I'm sure there are more that I don't know about, but I've resolved the stuff that's been enough to make a difference for me.
Mm. Well, I urge everyone to get your book because it really stops you in your tracks and makes you think about your life, your family history. I found it really interesting. So I will leave definitely that all that information in the show notes. And I've absolutely loved our conversation. I find the whole thing about identity very interesting. Um, but I'd love to end all my episodes with the same question. Now, I love a quote. So, do you have a quote that's resonated with you throughout your life?
I wouldn't say throughout my life. I mean, when I was, I think, 17, I wrote on the wall of my room that drinking, now alcohol doesn't solve your problems, it only irrigates them.
Wow,
That
that's
was
pretty good at
way back then.
17.
Wasn't bad. It
Hot
was
boy.
very serious. Wow.
You must have been.
In the last few years, and I think going forward, it will really be the Maya Angelou quote that there is no greater burden than the agony of carrying an untold story.
Oh, well, that ties in perfectly with your book, doesn't it? Yeah, love that one. Thank you for sharing. And thank you
Mhm.
for sharing your
Mhm.
story through your book and this great conversation today and I wish you all the best, that you're happy and that you're moving forward and Yeah, keep learning more and more about yourself.
True. And thank you for reading Hush. And what I've loved about this conversation is the role of identity. And,
Yes.
to me, it, we need to do a lot. We need to put it under our own microscope a lot more and really think about who we are and why we are. And so I would really urge people to be
Mm.
detectives of their own story and get down into that below the
Yeah.
water line.
And
So
it doesn't mean what you're going to find out is going to be traumatic. It could actually really surprise you and make a lot of sense to you.
absolutely. I mean, I just always thought I was an ordinary average person. There was nothing interesting about me. But when I think about the more I learned about my father's story, the more I learned about my brother and my mother, the more I came to realize that, yeah, I inherited their grief and shame and the trauma of generations before through war and so on. But I also inherited their courage and their
Mm.
bravery and their resilience. And
Wonderful.
so, and I wouldn't appreciate that about myself had I not done this
Yes.
work.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can dig up some really good stuff.
Absolutely. I've got to start asking more
Mm,
questions before my parents leave the earth.
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is really important, actually. Ask the questions, write them down.
I,
Yeah, because it'll
yeah.
get lost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle. And
It does.
again,
It does.
yeah,
Michelle.
congrats with your book. And please read her book. All the information in the show notes, and it's definitely a fantastic read. I read it within 2 days. I found it really easy to read and
Ah,
quite interesting. I just really wanted to keep reading to find out exactly what the secrets were and what you did with them. So, yeah, it's a really well written book. So, thank you so much, Michelle.
oh, thank you, Michelle. It's been a delight. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Your Second Act. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could rate and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to me.